So welcome everybody to the July edition of the Behaviours Matters webinar, when today we're talking about differentiating your organisation through amazing customer service. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michelle MacArthur Morgan and I am the founding partner of Jigsaw Discovery and one of the creators of the Jigsaw Discovery tool. My kind of background, certainly for the last 21 years now actually, has been in learning development, organisational development, but very much coming from an applied science kind of background. First of all, psychology, and then for the last 14 years from applied neuroscience. And we kind of bring those two disciplines together into the work that we do. I'm also a mindfulness practitioner, and I've spent the last 50 years in customer service. From getting a part-time job whilst I was still kind of in the latter years at school, I've always been working in a customer service environment. First of all, in the hospitality sector was my very first role. The introduction. During the pandemic, it was obviously perfectly understandable that levels of customer service in many organisations changed. They, dipped. The level of service that they provided was different in some way. And in the short term, that was, understandable. Customers made allowances for the adverse conditions that businesses were actually enduring at the time. However, using the pandemic, should I say, now, and staff shortages as reasons why customer service is lacking, in many instances is wearing thin with customers, and customers are now voting with their feet. They're turning to find businesses who can and does deliver what they say and really does have the customer at the heart of the business. And yes, these organisations, they've still got the same conditions. They still may encounter supply issues. They still will have staff shortages, just like all organisations. But the way in which they manage the situation and leave the customer feeling differentiates them from the rest. Now, we're all aware of the complexities and uncertainties facing business today, and maintaining your edge and competitiveness in a global market has never been more critical. And the only real differentiator that businesses, organisations can actually count on is its people and the service that they deliver. When I was starting out in the world, my career professional-wise, a long time ago, then I actually recall a meeting that I had with my school's career teacher. And she asked me, what I wanted to do, what intentions I'd got, plans I'd got for my future career, etc. And I actually said I wanted to go into the hospitality sector. I wanted to go into hospitality management. And it was something that I'd always wanted to do from being a very young child. Family members were in, it was kind of our family profession, if you like. And I always recall the absolute horror, the look of horror on the career teacher's kind of face as I said that I wanted to go into the hospitality sector. And she just looked at me and said, you do realise that the only people that go into a service sector are people that can't get real jobs. Now, what she didn't realise, and even today many people don't actually realise, is that to deliver amazing customer service requires a great deal of skill, and it really should be thought of and seen as a profession. And that doesn't matter whether you're delivering service to the internal customer, whether it's in business to business situations or business to consumer. It really is a great skill. What were the things we're going to be looking? We're going to be answering that question, that why some people excel at service delivery and some don't. We're also going to be discussing how behavioural preferences influence an individual's perception of the service that they are experiencing. We're going to look at how your service delivery might be perceived by your customers. We're going to talk about what we call the unspoken needs of the customer. And then we're going to wrap with looking at some behavioural-based strategies that help us to deliver outstanding customer service that leaves the customer feeling really kind of great, really kind of that wow, that delight factor, but not really being able to consciously explain why. And that's what we're talking about today. So one of the big passions at Jigsaw is to listen to what science tells us. And that's not always what conventional wisdom would have us believe. Now, one of the things we know from science is that the brain, as powerful as it is, has a very limited capacity, and we need to be respectful of its capacity and its limitations if we want to make it easy for our brain to remember things. So with that in mind, we've broken today's session down into 3 bite-sized chapters. The first one we're going to start on in a moment: how well do we know our customers? The second chapter, we're going to be looking at what we call the customer moods, their needs and expectations. And in the third chapter, then we're going to be looking at delivering that amazing customer service. So how well do you know your customers? A time just for a bit of reflection here. And all organisations have customers. Now, they may call them by other names: clients, patients, guests, users, visitors, relatives. And every interaction that we have with an organisation, whether that be with the organisation's website, a visit to their premises, a telephone call, a brochure, an email, it's an opportunity to deliver for that organisation, to deliver amazing service. Now, in the time we've got together today, we're only going to focus on the things that everyone within your organisation can do when they have a contact with a customer, whether that's a planned contact or whether that's just a casual contact, perhaps in the corridor of your premises, for example. And to help us kind of understand a little bit more about your organisations, just want to kind of you to share with us, and you can unmute if you feel easier, comfortable to do that, or just pop it in chat. Just, you know, who are some of you, how do you refer to your customers? Are they customers? Are they clients? Are they, is it business? Is it consumer kind of business? And what do you think are their kind of needs and expectations? What are their kind of key needs and expectations? So please, as I say, either pop that in chat or you can unmute if you prefer, entirely up to you. What are some of your who are your customers? Obviously not naming names, just general kind of categories of customers. And what are some of their expectations, do you think? Give you a moment or two to pop something in chat. As I say, please feel free to unmute if you prefer. List of customers or guests, yeah. Users, yeah. Clients. He needs to understand their unique business and to offer bespoke solutions, yeah. Sources of complaints, yeah. Any other key kind of needs that you think? Kind of just want to do now is just get you for just 5 minutes. I will pop you how many people? 1, 2, 3. Oh, there's only 4. So we'll actually do this collectively if everybody's okay to do that. Alice has just put in they want a friendly service that is quick and efficient. Yeah. So what I want to do is just to think for you to think about these questions. And if you perhaps want to unmute for this will be easier. And we'll just kind of have a bit of a conversation really about thinking about you as a customer. What are some of the things that you think or perhaps say behave? What observable behaviours do you have when you are a customer? And what are your needs and expectations as a customer? So if I give you an example for myself, my need as a customer, let's say in the morning, I usually walk down to the local paper shop and pick up a paper, pint of milk, a loaf of bread, whatever. Now, when I go into the paper shop, what I am actually wanting, besides the product, is what I'm actually looking for is I just want to go in, pick up my paper or my milk or whatever it is that I want, go to the counter, hand over my money, say please and thank you, and get out of there as quickly as I can. So that is what is important to me. When I'm on a telephone call, I just want to know if somebody rings me up, for example, then I don't want all the pleasantries of going through, isn't it a nice day, or how's things for you, or whatever. I just want them to get to the point and tell me what it is that they're trying to sell me, because they're usually trying to sell something to me. So, yeah, okay, so you're talking to me about an exhibition. I just want the kind of the key facts about that exhibition. So those are some of the kind of wants and needs, expectations that I have when I am the customer. So what about some of you who wants to kick us off with thinking about yourself as a customer? How do you behave? What are your kind of expectations or needs of a service situation?
I'm a little bit different, and I think it depends on what type of interaction it is, but not so much on the phone. But if I was in a shop, I'd like somebody to, you know, have a smile on their face, look like they're enjoying working where they work, be interested in me, give me full attention, you know, say good morning, not necessarily the how are you today, but just good morning, and, you know, is there anything that I can help you with? Let me know. Just a little bit more of the pleasantries. If it's on the telephone, I don't want to be just treated as a number. I want them to call me by my name with the correct pronunciation, because I often get, is that Karen McGowan? And that can be quite annoying.
Absolutely.
I'd rather they say, you know, how am I pronouncing your name? So I want them to be upfront if they're on the phone, tell me what it is they're calling for straight away. And give me the option as to whether I want to continue.
Thank you, Karen. Anybody else like to share what are your needs and expectations? Do they differ at all from Karen or from myself?
Personally, I would just like it quite transactional, probably very similar to yourself. Just very kind of polite but very efficient, and just kind of don't need to kind of engage in kind of lengthy conversations or pleasantries, just kind of something that's very efficient.
Perfect.
I suppose for me, just adding on that, I mean, I depending on the situation, but I'm pretty simple in the sense that I would like it to be transactional, but not transactional in the sense it's cold. So I would like someone who's, if I've got a query or question, to really care about and own it, particularly around that, because I think that's important for me, that they really care about maybe your issue or question, and they're not just treating you as a number, but they're really taking ownership for it. So it might be actually that they don't know the answer to it, but at least they're going to go and find out and come back, and managing my expectations on that.
Perfect. Lovely.
I suppose it's empathy, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Empathy. Maru, are you there? Not okay. So we've started to kind of think about some of those differences in the ways that we can kind of we expect our service. Now that can be really kind of difficult from a service provider's point of view. How do they know when you're walking into the kind of the shop, unless they obviously know you as an individual, you're a regular customer, whether you're walking into the shop, whether you're walking into their offices, whether you're on the other end of the telephone, how do they know that you're the type of person that wants that more transactional service, or you're the person that wants that more interactional kind of service? So this is really what today is kind of about, first of all, the first kind of part of it. So we just move on into chapter 2. This is where we can kind of start to expand on what we're just discussing. So traditionally, we're taught to focus on the service or the product needs that the individuals reached out to our organisation for. But that's only part of the customer's needs. Because if all we do is focus on the product or the service, then we've got very little to differentiate us other than price from our competitors. Because, any kind of product, any service, and I haven't actually looked at the figure recently, but, a service, a product can be replicated within hours nowadays. So in honesty, there's very little there to differentiate us, and other than kind of price in many instances. I accept there are, perhaps certain venues, for example, who've got a totally unique kind of proposition, but there's still very little that we can do to actually differentiate us other than price. And if we go down that route of price being the differentiator, then that's a very fast downward spiral where in the end there are no winners. The real differentiator and the things that cannot be replicated in any sales or service situation is having a team of people who understand the need for a personal approach for each individual customer, a team who've got the skills to identify those individual customer needs about how they'd actually like the service delivered. And they're able to deliver the service in a way which is a best fit for that customer at that specific time. And it's that kind of difference between the blanket approach of treating the customer as you would like to be treated, which is when I started out in life in customer service, my first part-time job in the hospitality sector was we always treat the customer like either you'd like me to be treated or you'd like your granny to be treated. And that was very much the kind of approach in those days. But now we know that actually it's all about treating the customer as they would personally like to be treated in that moment. So in this section, we're going to be looking at how your behavioural preferences may influence the way the customer receives the service that they receive, and how their actual preferences may influence the service expectations and needs. So we're going to be discussing how we can identify a customer's mood, first of all, and what we learn about the way in which they prefer to then receive the service, something we refer to as that unspoken need of the customer. Now, before we kind of go into it, when we're using a behavioural framework, it's important to understand that behavioural differences in people and different situations are very natural. No one behavioural preference is any better or any worse than another. And we also need to appreciate that our customers' preferences might be in direct opposition of our own. Customers' preferences are indicators, and we need to kind of have this conscious awareness of this, that the customer preferences are indicators of how they like to receive the service. Now, using the Jigsaw Discovery Behavioural Framework, you can recognise, if you like, the clues, the cues that customers give out as to their mood, something we call the customer tells, at any specific moment in time. But we also need to be aware that during the course of an interaction with a customer, that their mood may change. And so we need to be, it's not just a case of we recognise the customer mood and that's it. We need to be constantly monitoring their tells, the clues that they give out throughout that whole kind of interaction. For the benefit of anybody who's not familiar with the Jigsaw Discovery Behavioural Framework, I'll just start with a very short recap of the 4 behavioural preferences, just give you the kind of headline, and I'm sure it'll serve as a reminder to others. So we have 4 characters for each of the behavioural preferences. So our ever ready character, our red behavioural preference, their key kind of drivers are about achievement and success. So they're the type of people who don't like to waste time. They can become quite impatient. They focus on getting the result, getting the outcome. They're people who like to feel in control of the situation. And they're quite blunt, quite direct speaking individuals. We then have our Ray of Sunshine character. Now, Ray of Sunshine's key drivers are all about enjoyment and novelty. They love things that are new. They get bored easily. They like interaction. They can be quite talkative, quite chatty individuals. And they openly kind of display their emotions. You know, they're very expressive kind of people. And they're the type of people that generate quite a lot of excitement in others. We then have our Carey character. Now, Carey's key drivers are about caring, helping other people, fairness and protecting other people. So some of their characters, they're very much into relationships. They value friendships and relationships. They're very supportive of other people. They don't like conflict type situations. They'll try and avoid conflict. And if it came down to putting a person or the task first, they will always put people first. They've got time for people, time to listen, time to help, time to support people. And then we've got Mr. Huey Blue. Mr. Huey Blue is all about maintaining order and correctness. Mr. Huey Blues are people who like processes, procedures, control. They like correctness. They like that attention to detail. Knowledge is very important to the Huey Blue. They dislike the unknown. They like certainty. They're a little bit risk averse until they've got all the information or the evidence that they need. They won't be rushed and pushed into making a decision until they've got all that information that they actually feel that they need. So that's just a kind of a very quick introduction to each of the 4 kind of characters, behavioural preferences. And it's really important that we as service providers, the service giver, we have a high level of self-awareness. And we're going to come more to that in the next chapter. But it's also important that we as a service giver are able to recognise what we call the behavioural moods of our customers, which fall into these 4 behavioural kind of preference categories. So to deliver really amazing customer service using behavioural preferences as your leverage, there's a 3-step kind of process. First of all, we have to identify the customer mood. Now, we refer to it as the behaviours of the customer's moods, simply because what you are seeing and hearing is how they are presenting at that moment in time. And that might not be representative of their natural behavioural preference. So, for example, it may be that they're in a bit of a hurry at the moment because they've only got a few minutes left on the parking meter, or they're just on the way out of the door, they're leaving for an important meeting. So we can only go with the clues, the tells, as we perceive them to be at that moment in time. Once we've then identified the customer mood, that will inform us as to that customer need, the unspoken need, as we call it. That then informs us as to what we can do as a service giver to actually adapt our service delivery, to personalise it to the individual customer. Then to identifying the customer mood. The first thing we need to do is to actually recognise the tells that the customers are giving out to us through their behaviours, through their actions, their words, their vocal qualities, their body language. Carl Jung actually said we leak the truth from every pore. And when we know what to look for, then we can identify quite easily, actually, the customer moods within a few kind of 1-2 kind of seconds even. We can get to actually get a feel for what mood the customer is in if we know what to look for. So identifying the tells, it isn't difficult. In fact, our senses are constantly taking in information. Our brains take in and process approximately 11 million bits of information per second. And it's just that if we're not aware of this information and the fact of how much information is being pulled in through our senses and the processing of it, and if we don't have a behavioural framework to then match that information that we're receiving to, then it makes it harder for that vital information, customer clues to be picked up on by our brain. So let's just kind of test this out, let you test it out. You're going to need a pen and paper. So you can just grab yourself a pen and paper. At the top of your piece of paper, what I'd like you to do is write the name. You're not going to have to share this, by the way, okay? Write the name of one of your customers. So just think of a customer and just write the name at the top of the piece of paper. It is helpful for this activity if it's a customer that you haven't just had a little conflict with or something like that. So think of a customer, put the name at the top of the piece of paper. Okay, so now what I'd like you to do, using the tells on screen, I want you to make a note. As I said, you're not going to have to share this. I just want you to make a note of the tells that you recall seeing in your customer that you've named the most often. I want you to remember it's important to think about tells as positive, helpful information, clues as to the mood that they're in. And this is really kind of probably more important if the customer's own behavioural preference is different, or if the customer's mood is different to your own behavioural preference. So pop down on your piece of paper which of those tells that you recognise, or any other tells that come to mind when you think about that customer. I'll just give you a moment to do that. Find that activity then. Could you actually recall some of your customer tells? Anybody wants to unmute or put in chat, whichever? It's fairly easy to identify some of your customer tells.
Yeah, a customer who's very decisive, knows exactly what they want, has got quite a loud speaking voice and can become impatient, but they're never punctual. every meeting they're always late.
Yeah.
Because they're really busy doing something else.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Karen. Anybody else? So Obviously, the list of tells that's on screen there is not exhaustive by any means. And when we're delivering this in a workshop, then we get learners to actually think about their own customers, specific situations, and obviously we take a lot longer to do this, because it's about them identifying specific actions and specific behaviours, specific words in certain situations or types of interactions. So for many years, we've delivered this framework in libraries and museums and hospitals. And in each of those cases, the learners have identified the tells that they observed with their customers in their organisations. So, for example, we'll give you an example from a library, for example. One of the things, behaviours that you can notice when you know what to look for, is customers who appear to be hovering. They'll hover around a notice board, for example, or they'll hover around a bookshelf. Now, it's not that they're looking at the notice board or looking at the books because they've hovered for a little bit too long to be doing that. Now, when we notice a customer in a library doing something like that, that automatically gives us some clues. And what we kind of know is that the customer that tends to be hovering is either waiting for an opportune moment, or what they perceive to be the opportune moment, to actually approach a member of staff, or they're possibly watching somebody else from a distance, perhaps operating, for example, a self-service machine in the library. We used to get that a lot when we were working with libraries introducing self-serve machines, for example. Then the self-serve machines, there was usually a notice board not too far away, just by coincidence. And we would see customers taking an unusual amount of interest in the notice board. However, when we actually looked at it closely, what we noticed was they weren't really reading the notices. They were watching other people actually use how to use the machine. But these all give us tells, clues, as to the behavioural mood of the customer. And that then helps us to actually adjust our service delivery accordingly. So what I want to do now is just look at some of those general kind of tells. Now, I can only obviously talk about general tells in an open workshop such as this. And remember, in a workshop, if we were doing this as a workshop with a client, then we'd actually be looking at specific situations. So here we're going to go with some of the kind of the general tells. So we'll go back to each of the 4 characters. So those are the character traits that we talked about earlier. Any ideas what some of the tells for an ever ready may well be? You want to, again, you can pop it in chat or just unmute, whichever you prefer. Any thoughts what you might what would be some of the clues they'd give away to being in that red mood? Any thoughts? Not too sure? Okay, so let's have a look here then. So what we tend to find under the chit chat, straight to the point and demanding, Karen said, yeah, absolutely. Some of the tells, they're people, they tend to have quite a confident, assertive kind of look around their body language. They speak confidently, often speak quite quickly, quite loud, quite authoritative, fast talking, yeah, walk quickly, absolutely. They might come across a bit pushy. They can become impatient if they kept waiting for too long. They're also the type of people who, they dislike queuing, if it's that kind of situation where they're expected to queue and wait their kind of turn. And they use words like I want, I need. So quite direct speaking, loud talking, quickly, kind of a confident, assertive kind of individuals in their body language. That are some of the clues, the generic kind of clues to somebody that's in a red mood. So you can start to see that even on the telephone, you can pick up on these cues quite quickly, actually. You know, as soon as somebody answers the phone, you can start to pick up on the fact that, you know, by the tone of the voice. And it starts to give us from that very first kind of moment that we have that interaction. So our Ray of Sunshine character then, some of the clues for the tells the Ray of Sunshine are going to give us. They tend to be quite chatty, quite talkative. One of their big things is they know exactly what it is they want, but they kind of tend to be quite vague. They perhaps don't have all the facts or all the details. Now, I recall a few years ago, actually, there was a Neil Diamond DVD came out, and I think it's called Hot August Nights. But I recall it was coming up to Christmas. My husband was a great fan of Neil Diamond, and he kind of said, oh, you could get me the new Neil Diamond DVD for Christmas. So I said, oh, okay, yeah, you know, what's it called? And he said something like Hot Summer Nights. And I searched high and low for Hot Summer Nights. Couldn't find a Hot Summer Nights anywhere. Turned out it was Hot August Nights. He knew what it was. He knew what he wanted. And I actually said this to him after Christmas. I said, I went searching high and low to find you that DVD. And I said, you know, you said it was Hot Summer Nights, and there was no Hot Summer Night. Well, it's close enough, I said. And that's what I mean by they don't always have all the facts, all the detail, but they are very clear what it is that they do actually want. Talk with their hands, they've got quite expressive individuals. They're often the people as well that if it's in a situation where they should find a piece of paper, you know, some information out of their briefcase, for example, or in a situation in a retail situation, they have to find the wallet or the credit card out of the wallet. They're often the kind of people that it takes them an age to, which pocket did I put my wallet in, or which part of the briefcase did I put the papers in? They kind of takes them a little while just to find the information that they're looking for, or the credit card or whatever. With our Carey character, so any thoughts on what the tells of the Carey character may be? Again, unmute or pop in chat, it's entirely up to you. Please and thank you, patient, use your name. Yeah, absolutely. So with the Carey characters then, they are, the library customer was a Carey character, the ones that hovered, that hung back a little bit. They didn't want to interrupt the staff members if they were busy, because the staff members looked busy. So they didn't want to interrupt them. They tend to kind of approach you as staff member very often. I'm sorry to bother you. I'm sorry to trouble you is often kind of a really overused phrase in a customer situation used by somebody who's in a Carey mood. They've often got a softer speaking voice, a slightly slower speaking voice. They're often prone to having their favourite members of staff. So they'll ring up and perhaps ask for a specific individual just because they've dealt with that individual before, or they'll go into a shop perhaps or a bar, and they'll kind of look for the known faces. So that's our carers. And if we go to our Mr. Huey Blue then, some of their kind of tells, they're very punctual. They wouldn't be late for a meeting. It's all about, they're very organised. If they bring in some paperwork to you, they'll have everything that they need. And the paperwork, you know, if there's lots of letters and things, they'll all be in chronological kind of order. They expect things to be done correctly. They know their rights. They can be a little bit kind of come across a little bit more formally, and they may well expect you to kind of approach them in that kind of formal Mr. Mrs. kind of way. So those are just some of the kind of general tells But as I say, I'm sure as you think about your own clients, you can start to now come up with individual tells that how clients from those 4 behavioural styles will actually react and behave, types of things they're likely to say in any kind of given situation. So let's just think now then about that unspoken need. If we perhaps go back the way for a moment, with the unspoken need then for the blue, what do you think? So we've now identified them. What would be the unspoken need? What are their needs and expectations for service delivery? What are they looking for in your service delivery? The personalised approach. Any thought? Yeah, full information, detail. They want accuracy of information, the correct information. They want a professional kind of service approach. They don't want you to be over familiar, but they expect you to be polite. They also expect you to deliver what you say you are going to deliver. Now, there's a wonderful advert on TV at the moment, and to be honest, it's that wonderful, I can't even remember which one of the companies it is. It's somebody like Deliveroo or Uber, and it shows you somebody getting home, presumably after work. They realise they've no milk or something, that they've run out of something. And they ring up and order it, and they say that, you know, in as little as 20 minutes, you can be sitting on your settee drinking that cup of tea with the milk in it. Now, claims like that can be very dangerous with a Huey Blue, because again, they've got that expectation now that they can pick up the phone, order that milk, or go online, order that milk, and it will be there within 20 minutes. Because in the Huey Blues world, things are, you know, they're kind of right or wrong. And if you say 20 minutes is 20 minutes. It's not 19 minutes, it's not 21 minutes, it's 20 minutes. So just thinking back, and just pop this back quickly into our Carey, what do you think would perhaps be some of the unspoken need of the Carey? What are they looking for? And again, they may not be consciously aware of this themselves if they don't have that self-awareness. So what's the unspoken need of a Carey? Any thoughts there? Personalised attention, politeness. Yeah, they are wanting those things. They're kind of just drilling down a little bit helpful. Yeah, drilling down a little bit lower, because these unspoken needs are unspoken needs beyond what I would say the minimum kind of service delivery standards should be. Okay, so from a carer's point of view, they are looking really for a relationship. They want to build a relationship, first of all. They don't want to get straight down to the transactional business. They want a relationship. They want to feel valued, listened to. They want you to help them feel safe, to give them the confidence that they can ask what they perceive to be that stupid question. They want reassurance. So really what they're looking for from the service provider is a service provider that actually reassures them, perhaps offers them recommendations, makes them feel valued, and makes them feel kind of safe enough to ask the questions. So reassurance, more hand-holding. Yeah, absolutely, Carey. So then we go, if we go back to our Ray of Sunshine character, what are they actually? What's their unspoken need? Thoughts there? A little bit more difficult is the Ray of Sunshine one, really. The Ray of Sunshine, remember, they Their key drivers are about enjoyment, novelty, and what they're looking for is for the experience to be enjoyable, for it to be fun in their kind of world. Yeah, Karen, you've got it right. To have a laugh, a joke, to have a conversation, show them new things, new ideas, new ways of doing things. They want to feel as if they are the most important, if not the only person in your world. They want that interaction with you. So they want that kind of bit of banter in the morning when they go for the pint of milk or whatever. Relationship but less detailed, clear information in an engaging kind of way. Yeah, it's about delivering with that passion, that enthusiasm that we'll come on to, absolutely. So it's all about how can you make that experience for the customer, for the Rail Sunshine customer, enjoyable? How can you get them involved? How can you make them feel that they are the only person in your world? And last but not least, if we went back to the Ever Ready character then, what do we think about the Ever Ready character? What are their unspoken needs? We spoke about actually some of these earlier. I think Karen gave us some unspoken needs of one of her clients, or some needs of one of her clients, I think it was. Make them feel important, be quick, efficient, and don't waste their time. Yeah, absolutely. For the Ever Ready, it's all about speed and efficiency. They also look for competent, confident staff. They want to deal with staff members who talk with authority, who talk as if they know exactly what they're talking about. They've got all the confidence and they want the result. First and foremost, they want speed and efficiency and the result. Whatever it is, the outcome that they are looking for. Now, we can't always give them the outcome, and that's absolutely fine. But if we haven't got or can't do, what they don't want then is somebody to become, in a red language, dithery, indecisive. They want somebody who is competent and confident and will help them to find the solution. Now, that might be that we point out where else they could get that solution, or how they could get that solution, or whatever it is they're looking for. Or it could be by us giving us, well, we can't do this, but what we can do is this or this, and giving them those options, telling them what we can do for them, not overly apologizing for what we cannot do for them. So they're looking for that speed and efficiency and competence, and to get the result that they are actually looking for. Okay. What I want to do now, one slide too far, is just put this knowledge to the test. I'm going to bring up 4 actual statements, because tells are not just about the behaviours, it's also about the things that people say that give us that insight into their mood. So I'm going to bring up 4 statements, one at a time, and I just want you, it's probably the best thing to do here is probably just shout it out. Just unmute yourself and shout out if you know which customer mood the person is speaking from. So here we go. It's somebody going into a toy shop to buy some toys. So this one that's on screen now. Red, yellow, green or blue?
I'm leaning towards blue because they've done their research on the internet and they've given the specific date of the birthday and asked about any returns or problems.
Absolutely. They've gone into the detail, very kind of detailed. Yeah, blue it is. What about this one? Red, yellow, green?
That's a red, very direct.
Yeah.
I'll make their mind up straight away.
Yeah,
Source it.
yeah, absolutely. This one. Any thoughts from anybody?
Yellow.
Yellow, yep. Why yellow, Kerry?
Because they're really quite excitable and it's what's new, that's fun, and
Yeah,
you know, just the language they're using. So yeah,
absolutely. And then our last one is obviously the green, and we can see that there, you know, excuse me, I'm sorry to trouble you, I'm looking for a present, you know, any advice that you've got. So we can see there. Now, obviously, I've kind of made them as obvious as possible to give you the insight into it. But again, thinking back about your own customers, your own clients, you will be able to start to hear some of those differences, hear the different things that they're saying, which will kind of give you that little clue into which mood are they in at the moment, where are they coming from. So we'll move through into chapter 3 now. So we've now identified the customer mood and we've got an understanding of their unspoken need. So in this final chapter, I want to focus on how we can deliver that really deep, amazing customer service that leaves them really feeling kind of wow. We probably won't be able to put it into words, but they just know that somehow you've made a deep connection with them at an unconscious kind of level. So to make this deep connection and deliver that amazing service, we need to turn our attention now to ourselves now. So we need to take a good look at ourselves in that role of service giver, service provider, because we need to have that awareness of how our customers, how your customers may perceive the service that you deliver if you operate from your own behavioural preference and ignore their mood. So just we'll take a few kind of moments to reflect on the behavioural preferences and how they may be perceived by customers who are presenting in a different behavioural mood. So our ever ready, for example, may well come across as overpowering, a little bit rude, a little bit impatient, even scary and unfriendly at times. So a little bit too kind of controlling. So the fact that I speak quickly, blunt, direct, straight to the point, it might be whoa from a customer's perspective. How do you think a ray of sunshine service giver may be perceived if the customer isn't in a ray of sunshine type mood? Any thoughts on that one? Again, unmute yourself if you prefer.
Might think you're a bit unprofessional or not particularly trustworthy, or a bit flighty.
Yeah, exactly. You know, they might start, I mean, especially, can you imagine a Mr. Huey Blue wants all that correct detail and information, and there's you, being your full kind of ray of sunshine, being your chatty kind of self, perhaps even cracking the odd joke or, a little bit of banter. Oh, yes. So, who is this person? How unprofessional are they? How absolutely disorganized are they? Do they really know what they're doing? Yeah. So we can start to see how it's really kind of key that we start to come closer to those customer moods and understand those customer moods. So a caring. Now, a caring, especially again, going with that direct opposite is also where we get that greatest kind of contrast. So me as a strong red, actually receiving service from a green caring provider, service giver, then, oh, for goodness sake, just, speed it up a little bit. They don't give necessarily that confidence that they can be seen as being a little bit indecisive. They can even be perceived as being a bit nosy. What difference does it make to you who this present's for or whatever? Yeah. Now, they might be asking genuine questions that will help them in their world to actually help us better, to deliver better customer service. But from a red perspective, no, they may well be being perceived as being too talkative, too slow, unsure, lacking in confidence. So again, you can start to see why it's so important that we're actually aware of these moods, unspoken needs, and can adjust accordingly. So Mr. Huey Blue might be perceived as a bit of a job's worth, too pedantic, too long-winded, unfriendly, boring, doesn't they? Oh, they go on with all, I don't want all that information. I just wanted a simple yes or no kind of answer. So that just again gives you some insight into how we may be perceived as the service giver if we ignore the customer's moods. So obviously, as the service giver, we don't intend to come across in that way, far from it. So that's why it's, you know, as I say, important we understand more about our customers. Now, one of the things that we know from brain science is that when we're under pressure, we start to feel overwhelmed, we perhaps start to feel stressed, or perhaps if you're under the weather, you're not feeling so great yourself, then unless we have really high levels of self-awareness and are able to regulate our emotional responses, the likelihood is that we will naturally operate from our own behavioural preference and we won't focus on those unspoken needs of the customer. And that's why we need a behavioural framework, a reference point to help us as service givers to make recognising the customer moods as simple as possible and allow us to develop some kind of behavioural habits to deliver that personalised, kind of individualised, bespoke service aligned to the customer moods. So habit formation is an important part of this kind of amazing service delivery because habits are very energy efficient from a brain's perspective. And bearing in mind just how kind of stressed we know people are, how overwhelmed, how worried they are about all the uncertainties in the world, we know that service givers are already struggling with all that uncertainty, with the kind of stress and frazzle. So it's really important that we help our team out, we help our service givers to actually conserve as much brain power as possible just to help them get through the day, which is why that we look at kind of habit formation. So delivering amazing behavioural-based customer service then requires the service giver to adapt their style. So there will be some occasions when your natural behavioural preference actually matches and is aligned to the customer mood. But in the majority of cases, that isn't so. And we, as the service giver, need to adapt our style. So we have to operate from a non-preferred behavioural style as the service giver. Now, this can be likened to writing with the wrong hand, your non-dominant hand. And if you've ever actually written with your non-dominant hand, when you're actually doing it, it can feel really quite strange, quite uncomfortable, perhaps even unnatural. And we know it uses an awful lot more energy, an awful lot more brain power. So operating from your behavioural preference is actually so much easier. That's when we're writing with our dominant hand, our correct hand. And that's why habit formation is important, because if we've already primed our brain up, if we've trained our brain, then we can automatically, when the customer does X, then this is what I will do Y. We've already saved the brain an awful lot of processing power. So it's connecting customer behaviours to their mood and then to our response. So we're starting to form habits. So that we can do then, again, these have to be very general in an open session like this, because normally we'll be doing this in-house with an organisation, looking at their customers, their unspoken needs, and the way in which the service deliverer could deliver very personal service to the individual client. So the key kind of things there, with an Everready, we need to acknowledge that need for speed. So let them know, saying things like, I will do this as quickly as I can. That has actually made a connection with their unconscious need. You have used that word quickly. Now you will do it no quicker than you would do for the next customer, but you've used that word. I will do it as quickly as I can. We don't keep pestering them, don't keep ringing them up, going back, but we do need to keep them on the radar, because I think it was Karen again mentioned, Everreadys can be quite decisive. Once they make their mind up to go with an idea or to do something, they want it to happen very quickly. So we need to kind of have them on the radar. We need to be assertive and confident back with them. If the Everready is upset, for example, a little bit annoyed, there is a tendency by caring people who have service givers who have a strong higher caring preference to actually become very apologetic, and they're kind of worried that they'll upset the customer if they say the wrong thing, and so they don't come across in the assertive, confident way, and all that does is actually wind the customer up even more. So we need to maintain assertiveness, not be rude, but we need to maintain our assertiveness and come across in that confident manner. We need to keep to the point. We need to summarize the key points, focus on what we can do rather than long apologies for what we can't do. And we need to provide them with options so they feel that they're in control. If we then look at the rail sunshine, rail sunshines like to be remembered. So if we've spoken to them before, if we've had any interactions, any dealings with them before, they like that kind of acknowledgement. So they like you to use their name and use it correctly. They like to have that chat, that banter that we kind of spoke about. They want to be involved and they want to be kept occupied. So if you have to keep them waiting, then try and find something that they could be doing, that they could get involved with, something that would keep them occupied. You might need to keep control of the situation because they do have a tendency to wander off in different kind of directions, and you'll be having a conversation talking about one issue and then suddenly they introduce other information, introduce another question. So you might need to keep controlling them, pulling them back to what you're discussing at the moment, and then say, yep, that's great, you know, I hear what you're saying about that. Can we just put that to one side? I'll come back to that in a moment, so that you are actually bringing some structure. That might not always be appropriate. Again, these are very kind of generic things just to give you a few ideas. We need to keep them informed of what is happening. Again, it goes back to that easily bored. And if we can create that kind of sense of involve them in the service delivery, create that sense of colleagueship there kind of thing. You know, it's all about the we which includes them. The carers, we've got to put them at ease, help them to feel relaxed, help them, reassure them, offer them suggestions, recommendations, speak with a slightly softer, slightly slower speaking voice, but do not be patronizing. It's not about you changing. If carer isn't your natural preference, you don't have to become a carer. You just have to slide further along the axes towards the caring preference. It's about building that relationship, having patience, not pushing them and rushing them, trying to get them to make a kind of decision. It's also about checking that they've got everything that they want, giving them space to think and to ask their questions. And it's about being aware when there is perhaps any hesitancy, there, and asking them about that and seeing how you can offer more support and help them with that. And last but not least, Mr. Huey Blue. Now with Mr. Huey Blue, we know it's about correctness. It's about detailed information. It's about providing evidence. We need to be quite precise. We need to be logical and sequential in the way that we actually present information or talk about things. Never ever guess an answer for a Huey Blue. If you give one wrong fact, one wrong piece of information to a Mr. Huey Blue, then they will never trust anything that you tell them again. You totally lose their confidence in you as a service giver. If you can write things down for them, they like the written word, they like evidence, things they can refer back to. Give those detailed and full explanations. Don't shy away from any potential issues there may be or challenges. Actually talk about them and how you will manage them. Reassure them, giving that confidence that yes, you will actually, you know, this is what we do. This is the process that we will follow. Talk about rules and policies, processes, you know, procedures, because those are the things that give them trust and help them to trust in you and your organization. So I just want to conclude. We have come to the end of today by saying, although we've focused on behaviours and that kind of face-to-face, a little bit of telephone kind of interaction, you can use this exact same framework to inform you about how you communicate in more wider kind of general terms, obviously verbal communication, but also in emails, in marketing literature, or even company reports. So if you're kind of really serious about delivering amazing customer service that matches the mood and meets that unspoken need of the customers, then my number one tip is practice, practice, and practice again. Just keep on practicing. Form those habits, rehearse those situations of how you personally as a service giver will respond when you have a customer have a different behavioural mood that you're interacting with. Think about the tells, the cues that they give out and how those moods are aligned with your natural preferences and what can you do in different situations. That helps you to form those personal service habits. So that brings us towards the end of the session today. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I will take questions if anybody has got any questions, but just in case anybody wants to dive off straight away, thank you very, very much for coming.